Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a pivotal yet often overlooked moment in American history: the Spanish-American War. You might have heard the phrase, "a splendid little war," but this conflict was anything but little in its consequences. It was the moment America stepped onto the world stage, not just as a growing nation, but as a global power, an empire. So, how did a war that lasted less than a year completely reshape America's destiny and the world map? Let's find out. To really get what happened, we need to rewind to the late 19th century. Spain, once a mighty global empire, was now a shadow of its former self. Its vast colonial holdings had dwindled to a few key territories, most notably Cuba and the Philippines. For decades, Cubans had been fighting for their independence from Spanish rule. These weren't just small skirmishes. They were brutal, prolonged conflicts. The Spanish government, led by General Valeriano Weyler, responded with extreme measures. They instituted a policy of reconcentration, forcing hundreds of thousands of Cuban civilians into fortified camps. The conditions were horrific. Disease and starvation were rampant, and countless people died. Now, picture America at this time. The nation was buzzing with energy. The frontier had closed, industrialization was booming, and a new sense of national pride and ambition was in the air. This was the era of manifest destiny, the belief that America was destined to expand its dominion and spread its values. But with the continent settled, where would this expansionist energy go? The answer, for many influential figures like Theodore Roosevelt and naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan, was overseas. Mahan argued that a powerful nation needed a powerful navy and overseas bases to protect its trade routes. The idea of America as a global naval power was gaining serious traction. This is where the American press comes in. Two newspaper giants, William Randolph Hearst of the New York Journal and Joseph Pulitzer of the New York World, were locked in a fierce circulation war, and they found the perfect story in Cuba. They began practicing what we now call yellow journalism. They published sensationalized, often exaggerated, and sometimes completely fabricated stories about Spanish atrocities in Cuba. Headlines screamed with tales of Spanish brutality, painting them as villains and the Cuban rebels as heroic freedom fighters. These stories tugged at the heartstrings of the American public, creating immense sympathy for the Cuban cause and outrage against Spain. It was a masterclass in shaping public opinion, and it worked. Americans started demanding that their government do something. President William McKinley was initially hesitant to go to war. He had served in the Civil War and knew its horrors firsthand. He preferred diplomacy, but the pressure was mounting. Two key events pushed him and the nation over the edge. First, the delay letter. This was a private letter written by the Spanish minister to the United States, Enrique de Puy de la May. It was stolen and published by Hearst's newspaper. In it, Day Lame called President McKinley weak and a bidder for the admiration of the crowd. It was a massive insult, and it infuriated the American public. Nationalism flared. How dare a foreign diplomat speak about their president that way? But the final straw, the event that made war inevitable, happened on February 15th, 1898. The U.S. battleship Maine, which had been sent to Havana Harbor to protect American interests, exploded and sank, killing 266 American sailors. To this day, the exact cause of the explosion is debated. It might have been an external mine, as many believed at the time, or it could have been an internal accident, like a coal bunker fire. But at that moment, the cause didn't matter. The yellow press immediately blamed Spain. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain, became the rallying cry across the nation. The public demanded revenge. The pressure was too much for McKinley to resist. On April 25, 1898, the United States officially declared war on Spain. The war itself was surprisingly short and decisive. It was fought on two main fronts, the Caribbean and the Pacific. Everyone expected the main action to be in Cuba. But the first major battle took place halfway around the world in the Philippines on May 1st. Commodore George Dewey, leading the U.S. Asiatic Squadron, sailed into Manila Bay. In a matter of hours, his modern steel ships completely annihilated the aging Spanish fleet without a single American combat death. It was a stunning victory that announced America's naval power to the world. Dewey became an instant national hero. U.S. ground troops, aided by Filipino rebels led by Emilio Aguinaldo, soon captured Manila. The Filipinos, like the Cubans, had been fighting for their own independence from Spain and saw the Americans as allies in their struggle. A hope that, as we'll see, would soon be shattered. Back in the Caribbean, the focus was on Cuba. The U.S. Navy blockaded the island, trapping the Spanish fleet in Santiago Harbor. The American ground invasion, however, was a bit of a chaotic affair. The army was ill-prepared, with soldiers wearing heavy wool uniforms in the tropical heat and dealing with logistical nightmares. But the troops were enthusiastic, especially the most famous unit of the war, the Rough Riders. This volunteer cavalry regiment, technically led by Colonel Leonard Wood, but spiritually commanded by its charismatic founder, Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, was a motley crew of Ivy League athletes, cowboys, and frontiersmen. Roosevelt had resigned his post as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to seek glory on the battlefield, and he found it. The Rough Riders, along with several African American regiments, famously charged up Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill on July 1st. while the charge was much less organized than Roosevelt later portrayed it. It was a decisive victory that captured the American imagination. Shortly after, the Spanish fleet tried to break out of Santiago Harbor and was completely destroyed by the U.S. Navy. With its fleets gone and its armies defeated, Spain had no choice but to surrender. On August 12, 1898, an armistice was signed. The splendid little war was over in less than 4 months. The Treaty of Paris, signed in December 1898, officially ended the war. The terms were a massive victory for the United States. Spain agreed to grant Cuba its independence. But here's the twist. Spain also ceded Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States. And in a move that would have huge ramifications, Spain sold the Philippines to the US for $20 million. Just like that, America had an overseas empire. The flag now flew over territories thousands of miles from its shores. This outcome sparked a massive debate back home. On one side were the imperialists, like Roosevelt and Senator Albert Beveridge. They argued that it was America's duty, its white man's burden, to govern and civilize these lesser peoples. They also pointed to the economic and strategic benefits of having colonies, like new markets for American goods and naval bases around the world. On the other side were the anti-imperialists, a diverse group that included figures like Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, and William Jennings Bryan. They argued that imperialism violated the core principles of the Declaration of Independence, the idea that all people have a right to self-government. How could a nation born from a revolution against an empire now become an empire itself? This debate was most fiercely contested over the Philippines. The Filipino people, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, had fought alongside the Americans to oust the Spanish, believing they would be granted independence. When they realized the U.S. intended to annex their country, they felt betrayed. In 1899, the Philippine-American War broke out. This was no splendid little war. It was a brutal, bloody conflict that lasted for 3 years and cost far more lives and money than the Spanish-American War. It involved guerrilla warfare, torture, and concentration camps. Ironically, the very same tactics the U.S. had condemned the Spanish for using in Cuba. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos and over 4,000 American soldiers died. So what was the legacy of this whole era? For Spain, it was the end of its empire and a period of national soul-searching. For Cuba, it was a complicated independence. The Platt Amendment, which the U.S. forced into the new Cuban Constitution, gave America the right to intervene in Cuban affairs and established the naval base at Guantanamo Bay. Cuba was technically free, but it remained under the heavy influence of its powerful northern neighbor for decades. Puerto Rico and Guam, became, and still are, U.S. territories. Their residents, American citizens, but often without full representation in their own government. And for the United States, the Spanish-American War was a definitive turning point. It marked the end of American isolationism and the beginning of its role as a world power, with all the complexities and controversies that come with it. The nation that once fought for its own freedom from an empire now found itself ruling over other peoples. The debates over America's role in the world that began in 1898 are debates we are still having today. The splendid little war cast a very long shadow, one that fundamentally shaped the course of the 20th century and continues to influence American foreign policy in the 21st. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this interesting, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and let me know in the comments what you think. Was the rise of American imperialism inevitable?